There we go. Okay, so investigations part 2. This is a build on from what we did last month. And I guess what I want to reinforce with this one is this is awareness of the issues that you need to take account of. We're never going to get all of the how-tos over to you in 1 hour. So there is a lot of you need to think about and you need to remember. And I hope that they are helpful. And at the end of it, that you've got some little nuggets to take away with you to remind you of some of the issues. So we're going to go through these 5 areas which we get complex investigations. And these are we'll run through our learning and our understanding of the things that companies find complex. So we're using our experience in relation to this. So what makes an investigation complex? It can obviously be a whole range of things, including the investigation involves a really senior person. The issue might not be complex, but the very fact that it's someone very senior just adds that extra layer on the top. Involves a regulatory body. We've been involved in investigations that have been to SSC, to an Oscar involved at some point, housing regulator, social work registration. So that in itself makes it complex in relation to risk. And I guess most of these do relate to risk, don't they? There's a significant business risk in some way around what the issue is. Then you just have to think a bit more about that. Bullying and harassment inevitably become more complex. A straightforward conduct issue. Did somebody do X, Y, Z? You've got the evidence they did or they didn't. Harassment and bullying is a bit more of that weighing up and trying to identify clear measures to come to reasonable conclusions. Discrimination is under the same bag of what is discrimination. We all know what it is, but in terms of is someone being discriminated against, there's a lot of information around how you go about that. Media interest, of course, puts another layer on top of what you're doing. If you know something's going to be in the papers tomorrow or is already being spoken about, then it makes it more complex. There's a lot more stress around it. Numerous allegations, policies or codes of conduct. We've done investigations that had, I'm trying to think, Angela, of the most allegations we've had. It's been a really high amount. I'm thinking of almost 70. Or is that me exaggerating?
No, I would say so. If it's a collective grievance, there tends to be numerous allegations, but it's not uncommon just for a normal grievance or bullying harassment to have maybe about 7 or 8 allegations, but we can go up to, you're right, about 70 if we've got collective grievances that we're dealing with.
Yeah. Which, obviously makes it a lot more complicated. Other processes underway. So I know there's a lot of HR people on the call here. You know what you're doing with that. And is that challenge of a grievance? Is there a discipline underway? Is the grievance against something's happening in the discipline? Is there a grievance against a grievance, which sometimes happens, and all of the ways that your company deals with that. Potential gross misconduct puts a heavy layer on it, given where that report and investigation may well go to. Potential criminal offence and fraud, and your business will have your way of dealing with allegations of this kind. So it's important to be aware of the differences in relation to the complexity. A few things that I want to relate to all of what we're talking about. There's some links in here, quite a few links, I guess. Joanna will send you all an email afterwards with the links in it so that you have them. Just remember about the unconscious bias. Remember about, and the best way that I've found of dealing with that is recognizing your own bias, recognizing the things that light your candle or press your button. And what we talk about a lot is having clean sheet interviewing. So between one person, you see the person making the allegation, have that interview and you're like, oh my goodness, this is not great. You go to the respondent or witness's clean sheet. Start with a clean sheet of paper in terms of where your head is really important. These links help just with recognizing your own unconscious bias and a wee bit of fun with it in terms of taking a test. Impartiality, fairly similar in terms of knowing where you are, but how important it is that the person undertaking the investigation, is absolutely objective and has to be objective and be seen to be objective. Trauma-informed investigations. I popped this in because, probably in our part 1, I would have spoken about you're having this interview with someone and how straightforward they are about how they're responding to your questions, and where people are all over the place, or where they are very clear on one part of what happened and then they fudge over another and then become clear again. It is about just remembering that if there's trauma involved in some way, that people will not recall an event in a logical manner, and we've got to be really careful that we don't reflect that negatively in terms of our report and how we tackle things, including that their reaction you may feel is disproportionate to what happened. So we're really careful as to how we deal with that. A wee reminder about great questions. You're starting off with open questions. You're getting the story. You're finding out what happened, the facts, the background. You're then focusing on the detail. So tell me a bit more about what happened before, what happened after, and then you're delving down into, okay, my understanding is this is what happened. So just remembering that. Remembering about evidence and the value and the strength of the different types of evidence. The undisputed, yes, it was there, undisputed. And just the different weight that is attached to all of these different levels of evidence that you're gathering. And that weight needs to be reflected in your conclusions in terms of what you're doing. Also remember, in terms of balance of probability, for all of this, you're looking at, was it more likely to have happened than not? And more likely to have happened than not is your 51%. I know that most people that I know and work with, when we're looking at balance of probability, we would like to be a lot more than 51%, but that's the reality in terms of that balance. Before I move on to bullying, is there any questions there? Or grievance, sorry, moved straight into grievance. Any questions, Lindsay, that I need to pick up?
No, we're okay at this point, Dorothy.
Perfecto. Okay, perfecto. When did I start saying that? So what makes grievances different? And clear terms of reference. What policy are you being asked to relate the grievance to measure what happened against? And what are the solutions? We get asked to undertake grievance investigations, and it might just be give us the evidence as to whether there is an issue or there isn't. Others may say, and this is where the terms of reference is really important, we want you to try and come up with some solutions to resolve this. So really important to know, if you're given an investigation to someone or you're doing it, you need to know where your line is when you stop. Checking the policies. What do they say about grievance? What do they say about what the person needs to know, and how the investigator needs to go about it? We simple things in terms of number of days for notice of meetings, all those things. The simple and straightforward things to check. But it's important that you do. It's no point after when you've missed something. What's already been undertaken? Has there something already been done? Is there other processes underway? You need to get the context. And I get that's that, a grievance against a grievance. Someone puts in a grievance and the person the grievance is against, they put a grievance in against the other person. Just dealing with all of that. And what you tell those to be interviewed about the process, really important in terms of what happened next. That, of course, will relate to what your terms of reference say. And you must have your investigator being very tight in terms of what happens next. I've popped in there why issues might change, and this relates a wee bit to the how much information do you give the respondent. And I've popped that in because we come across companies where they have given the whole grievance content to the respondent. And we are like, right, okay, that's not going to be that helpful. And there's a number of reasons for that. The big one is that very often when you sit down with the complainant to talk through their grievance, and this could be internal, not necessarily us doing it, and the person will say, oh, do you know what? I've got the answer to that. I was just really angry when I put this letter together. So I know that's fine. And if you have already given a copy of that grievance to the respondent, then, you're stuck with it. And there will be something there that the respondent gets antsy about that they didn't need to. What we would say is you give the respondent enough information to allow them to come to a meeting to understand what it's about, but not so much that they're able to it's like any investigation, able to go away and work out and look at evidence, pull stuff that maybe they shouldn't be pulling. So we would say you give the person enough evidence to enable them to come to the meeting. Sometimes with grievances, the person will have put in a grievance and the company will say to us, yes, it's a grievance, but given the significance of the allegations, we want it conducted under the discipline procedure. So that's where, again, going back to being absolutely clear what policy this has been investigated under is critical for grievances. Okay, so I'm going to pop on to bullying now. No legal definition of bullying. ACAS describe it very well for us, that it is unwanted behaviour from a person or group that's either offensive, intimidating, malicious, etc., or an abuse of power. And I've popped that wee alarm in there because it's really important that you check your policy on bullying, because this term abuse and misuse of power used to be through means intended to undermine, humiliate, etc. Whereas now it's through means that undermine. That's a big difference, an enormous difference. And we've come across that in this last year, a number of companies where we look at the policy and we're like, that doesn't comply with ACAS, and it's a much higher standard. So if you were the person, the allegations, and making the allegations, you would want the ACAS definition. So really important that the ACAS definition is used fairly with people.
Can I just add to that, Dorothy, just on one that we had recently, where that wasn't in the employer's policy. Obviously, it's under ACAS, and the outcome was different. Should it have been one or the other?
Yes.
So it became, that way of are we using? So that's when it came back to the terms of reference. Were we to use the employer's policy or were we to use ACAS's policy, because it would have made a difference. Yeah. So that was a very complicated one, but yeah, as you say, it's a wee warning there, definitely.
Yep, okay, thanks, Angela.
Sorry, Dorothy, my postie was at the door there. I've got one one in the chat for you. So on bullying, have you ever had to investigate microaggressions, i.e. comments which treat someone differently on account of gender, race, etc.?
Yes, and we'll cover that. We'll cover that shortly.
You've got that. That's great. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Graham, Dorothy, I'll get on to that one.
Okay. So yeah, bullying definition, and just remember, I know this is, you all know this, but let's refresh ourselves. When you're doing that investigation, you need something to measure your evidence against. So fair investigation until it needs to be clear. We've said that in terms of the policies. So in terms of the balance of probabilities that the alleged bullying behaviour took place, so first of all, did it take place or not? If there's no evidence that the behaviour, forget about bullying for a moment, didn't take place, then you stop there. If the behaviour did take place, then you're looking at the impact that that behaviour had, and or whether it was an abuse of power or that undermines, humiliates, etc. And it can be, ACAS helps us with this too, in that they give us the detail of what bullying might look like. So pattern of behaviour, face-to-face, social media, all of these things. ACAS are pretty good at a lot of information in relation to what bullying can be. Your policy in your company will also have a list, usually, of behaviours that are regarded as inappropriate. If your company doesn't have, then you revert to what ACAS says as your measure. And just to try and get over that subjective versus objective, because there's that challenge, isn't there? Well, what is bullying? Would I think it was bullying and somebody else wouldn't? It is really important to look beyond that label of bullying and to be specific about the conduct. So for a moment when you're doing it, forget about bullying, just what is it? What exactly happened? And is there corroborating evidence to say that whatever it is, happened? And then you're cross-referencing what happened with your policies, codes of conduct, ACAS, whatever's appropriate for your organisation, and assess that conduct in context of what else is happening in that person's workplace, around about them, anything else that's relevant, mitigation, all those other things. And I've lifted the wording this last point straight, and I'm a bit uncomfortable with the wording, but to be bullying, you have to demonstrate the conduct made the complainer feel uncomfortable. And I did pick that up from a source, but uncomfortable, I'm interpreting that, and I'm sure this is what was intended by this comment, of if you're watching something happen and you think, oh, that's bullying behaviour, that's not right. It's not bullying if the person it's against didn't feel uncomfortable about it. So the person who's alleging that they're being bullied, they need to have a reaction to it. And that's important, because when we look at harassment, it's different. I've put a link there that, again, Joanna will give you in when we get our email out, and it's the Equality and Human Rights Commission. We've heard a bit about that, haven't we, in the political forums this last wee while, the EHRC. And just to pop in there was a private members bill that went in July this year to Parliament about having a legal definition of what bullying is. Because the minute, as you know, we don't have one. What we have is what ACAS says. There was supposed to be a second reading of that in November. I'm feeling a bit hesitant about that now, given all the talk about EHRC and the political conversations about what role EHRC should have in the UK. But it would be helpful to have a more of a legal definition, particularly when we're doing investigation. Going to move on to harassment. So any questions, Lindsay? Anything would be helpful to pick up now?
Not got anything at the moment, Dorothy.
Cool, okay. So let's look at harassment. Of course, we have the Act now. We have the Equality Act of 2010. That's the be all and end all in terms of harassment. So 1, a person A harasses B if A engages in unwanted conduct related to a relevant protected characteristic. And we're going to look at some of those words in a bit more detail. And B, the conduct has the purpose or effect of violating their dignity or creating this intimidating, hostile, blah, blah, etc., environment for B. And a quick look, which relates back to one of the questions, protected characteristics, all listed there. Harassment covers them all except pregnancy and maternity and marriage and civil partnership. The law in relation to discrimination covers all of those nine protected characteristics. Harassment, 7. So just to position that before we start. So if the behavior, the conduct, and I guess the first bit is, did the conduct happen in the first place? Is there evidence? If it's not related to protected characteristic, then it's not harassment, but it could be bullying. And I hope that answers the question that popped up earlier. Someone could make an allegation of bullying, and in the investigation, it comes out that actually there's a protected characteristic and an issue relating to that. Then what we would do if we were investigating something, we would go back to our commissioning manager, as we would say, our link in the business, to highlight that and ask them if they wanted to adjust the terms of reference to pick that up as well. We wouldn't want to just let it lie or not highlight it. Related to protected characteristic is a very wide test. It's different to because of, related to. That's quite a challenging one. It covers harassment based on someone else's protected characteristic. So a person could observe something happening to someone else and feel that the behavior was wrong and related to their protected characteristic, and they could consider themselves harassed because of it. And it also covers harassment based on a perception of someone's protected characteristic. So the behavior towards someone is inappropriate because of, say, disability. They don't have a disability, but it's still harassment because the person believed that they did. And as I said earlier, marriage, civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity aren't covered by harassment. They are covered by discrimination. So let's look at the measures then. And this is all about raising awareness of how you deal with, well, how do I know if it is or it isn't? So first of all, the evidence establishes the facts. Did it or did it not happen? If it did, then you move down the bullet points. If it didn't, you stop there. There is no evidence to support this allegation of whatever it is, because there's no evidence to suggest that it happened. You're then assessing, but did the conduct relate to a relevant protected characteristic? If not, it might be bullying. So if not, you go down and you look at all the bullying side of things. If you feel it is related to protected characteristic, then is the conduct unwanted? And did it have the purpose or effect of violating, etc.? And the purple lettering there, I'm going to go into each of those on the next slides, because again, you're doing that investigation and you're having to work through each of those areas logically and factually to identify as best you can. So let's have a look. Pardon me. Let's have a look at these measures. What is unwanted? Unwanted could be the same as unwelcome or uninvited. It must be presumed unwanted unless proved otherwise, which is a really important one. An express objection isn't required before something is deemed unwanted. The fact that the complainant joined in doesn't necessarily mean it's wanted. And it can go, it being the behaviour, from wanted to unwanted, because it may at some point overstep the mark. And I think when we look at that, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because someone might be in a position where they're feeling they're being harassed, but they don't know how to respond to it. So that unwanted is a really good way, and that explanation, to be as objective as you can in relation to it. We then have that purpose or effect of. So purpose, if there's evidence that the person intended to harass that person, A and B, then you don't need to look any further. You would have to have clear evidence that that was their intention. And then we look at the effect of, if not purpose, but there is an effect, so that the person is feeling harassed and all of those feelings. You then need to consider whether it was reasonable that it had that effect. And that, you know, I go back to donkeys years ago, back in the day when we were all writing our first discrimination and equality policy back in the 80s. And at that time, the word was, if somebody feels that they're being harassed, etc., if they feel it, then they are. Whereas what this does, it highlights that the reaction that they have, the person has to the behaviour must be reasonable. Must be a reasonable to have had that effect. So if it's something, you know how we talked earlier about trauma-informed investigations, and where an allegation of something was really, really deep for that person and they had a quite significant impact, but you might come back to this and say, do you know, that reaction to it in terms of the law isn't reasonable, and it's that importance of how you deal with that with a person, sensitively and in a caring, compassionate manner. And to do that, you're looking at the complainer's perception. You're looking at other circumstances of the case, so all that other stuff that goes on round about it, and then whether it was reasonable for the conduct to have had that effect. Excuse me. I think, you know, these measures, separating them out in this way, can be really, really helpful. And then if we look at violate the complainer's dignity, violating is a really strong word. It's more than offending or hurting dignity. So it's about remembering violate is pretty heavy duty stuff. And then did the conduct create an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating or offensive environment? Again, the decision based on facts, so context, really, really important. Need to think about whether it was directed at the specific individual, the timing of the complainer's objection, the frequency of the conduct, whether an environment has been created. So all of those need to be looked into. And I would say, and I know there's some investigators on the call here, that going through these different measures can be quite challenging. And what we do all the time anyway, but particularly with these kind of investigations, with all investigations, we have a quality assurance process. So we have someone who's not been involved in the team will go through an investigation report and just test out the thinking in a very objective way. Because when we're looking at doing the report, we need to have gone through each of those areas and shown that we've looked at each of them and what we concluded on each of them. I think I'm spinning through this pretty quick. I was going to go on to discrimination. Anything that we need to pick up, Lindsay, before we dip in?
I haven't got anything at the moment on the chat.
Okay,
no.
Please ask lots of questions. Not sure if I'll be able to answer them all, but you can give it a go.
Absolutely.
Discrimination then, I have 2 slides on this because the detail there is so much information around in relation to what discrimination is, and of course then what it isn't. So we know that the Equality Act, we know discrimination can be direct or indirect, and that victimization is where you treat someone to a detriment because of a protected act or supporting someone else who has put in an allegation of discrimination or anything that's under that act. And discriminatory treatment can include all of these: dismissal, redundancy, disadvantageous terms, etc. So how do we measure that? It's so important that we look at how the complainant alleges that they have been treated differently to others in similar circumstances. And if so, what possible reasons might there have been for that different treatment, which may not necessarily be the protected characteristic. We have to look at every possibility. Then whether the complainant has been treated less favourably than others. Whether there are facts from which it could be concluded that the difference of treatment was related to the complainant being a member of the protected group. So we're looking at it from every angle that we can. Are there reasons other than being a member of the protected group that could justify the difference in treatment? And the EHRC have a really, really good document called Employment Code of Conduct. And if you've not seen it up to now, it is absolutely worth having a good look at, because it goes through all of the areas of all the protected characteristics, each separately, and how a company should be treating that person in relation to their protected characteristic. And if we were doing a claim of discrimination investigation, we would be identifying what's the protected characteristic, and we would be going to the EHRC and looking at the detail that they have. And that would identify for us what the measures needed to be. And I think, as I said earlier, EHRC have a really, really good guide on investigating harassment as well. So really, really helpful. And I can't help but say it would be really disappointing if as a country we separated from EHRC, because they provide so much support and help us in terms of the fairness and equity. So that's discrimination. Not going into enormous detail because there's just so much that you can get from the EHRC and too much to try and squeeze in with what we're doing today. And then the last slide is the report. The report is absolutely critical. For your investigation to be seen as credible, you would need to explain how you came to your conclusions. So for each allegation, you're identifying the measures that you've used. Well, you're identifying, here's the allegation, this is what it relates to, here's the measures that I'm using, and you're pulling that out of either ACAS or the Equality Act or your own policy and procedure. So you're identifying the measures, you're showing the evidence for and against these measures, whether you're accepting that whole and in part, and then your conclusion. And that narrative of going through the measures and the for and against is really critical. And it's critical for a number of reasons. The person who raised the issue and the person they relate to need to fully understand the outcome. We no longer can do investigations which say, this is what happened and I don't think it was harassment or I don't think it was bullying. We have to be really clear on going through each of those areas. The deciding manager and or appeal manager needs to understand how you came to those conclusions and therefore make an informed decision. and an employment tribunal can see that the matter was taken seriously. And it'll make it much harder for a complainant to believe reasonably that an investigation itself is a product of discrimination or bullying, etc. And it's not been the first time that a person who has had a bullying or harassment allegation, who have got the outcome at the end and have said that report in itself or that investigation itself is bullying or harassment. So this is all about risk, managing risk, but doing a really thorough job in terms of how you relate your measures to your outcome. And I've gone through all of the slides, and we'd be very happy to have a conversation about anything that's popped up there that you would like to ask, or just or give some of your own experiences of, which would be very helpful too. Anything popping up, Lindsay? Help me with this.
No, nothing at all. There's a lot of comments about your slides being great. Maybe they were
Oh,
too.
right, okay. Sometimes it takes longer to do the slides than the words, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's it. Yeah, hold on.
I know there are some investigators on the call here. Anyone want to pop in any experiences that's helpful?
Graham, do you want to ask your question, Graham Rose? It's just come into the chat now.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I've got two questions then. I would love to know, Dorothy, whether or not you've actually felt influenced or suspected that people are trying to steer you in a certain way as to your findings.
Yeah.
Because it's been my experience that sometimes, you know, investigators being wholly impartial and wholly objective is really difficult, especially when there's a fee involved. So I'd be interested in your observations on that.
All right. Okay. Well, there's a number of things there. The fee involved one. We do get challenged at times. We do get not challenged, challenge is the wrong word, but we do get the message sometimes as to where, not a lot, but where a company expects the outcome to be. And we totally ignore that. Absolutely ignore that. And Angela, you may well have examples. I don't know if they're anonymized enough, but I'll give an example of something that happened where we got asked to do an investigation, and we were starting to get things sorted. And it turned out the client wanted to give us their notes of all the meetings, and they wanted us to write the report. And we said, absolutely not. No, that's not an independent investigation. So yes, we do get people trying to influence us, but absolutely not. You know, for us, and this is the obvious thing, I know, and you'll be saying this too, Graham, is that the first time you do that, it'll be the last time you do that investigation. You're only as good as your reputation. And that's just not right, is it? Absolutely not right. And now I've forgotten about the first bit of your question because I got carried away with that.
Well, I never asked it, but it was, how long do you keep? So often companies invest a lot of money in an investigation that they kind of want to keep it. But how long would you suggest an investigation report is retained for?
Oh, right. Well, Angela, do you want, I can see you're dying to pop in there. In terms of or maybe when we finalize the report, we pass it to the client and then we delete it after 3 months. Yes, Angela? Yep.
12 weeks. And that can be tricky sometimes if one of either a claimant or a respondent, depending how it goes on internally after we've come out of the business, if they want to go to a tribunal, it can be tricky because we don't have any of the information at all. But obviously it can be downloaded from the client at the time, but we've only got it for 12 weeks. Yeah.
And for us, that's in terms of our GDPR responsibilities. where we don't own the investigation. We are lost the word, but we're dealing with the information, analysing the information on behalf of the company, and we're giving it back to them. And if we ever
Processor,
that's the word I was trying to find. And if someone comes back to it, we have had a number of times where the claimant hasn't been happy with the outcome, the company hasn't given them the full report, they've maybe given them a reduced version, whatever they've decided was appropriate, and have come to us to ask for a copy. And we've said under GDPR, no, we can't. We've had that challenge, it's gone to the ICO, and the ICO have agreed with us. We're data processors. Not sure if that answers your question.
It was also from the client's point of view.
Yeah,
How long would you
yeah.
suggest the client keeps? Because it could be quite a detriment to that being on someone's file after.
Yeah. I guess you would expect the client to have their own policy and how long they retain information for.
Sure.
I can see a few people nodding.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I'll resist talking about little separate folders and cupboards that are locked. I'll not talk about that at all.
I think it's I'm just new to investigations, really a year and a half to Dorothy McKinney as well, and what I've found is in the couple that I've been part of that sometimes it's not the answer that they're looking for, you know, and that's a fairly difficult one. They want an outcome that's different, and you know, that's probably my take on what I think it's hard to then go to the client and tell them that, you know, I'm glad I'm not the investigator in these situations, certainly.
And that's back, it also helps with your terms of reference being absolutely clear as well. And I know, and you know, my previous experience, I've been more working in-house than with our business. But when I would get investigations to do, I got handed an email. There's a grievance, go and investigate it. Or somebody's done such and such, go and investigate it. And terms of reference wasn't something that anybody ever thought about. We do, and you know, when we are doing our investigation skills training for companies, we recommend that in-house you have the terms of reference as well, because it helps so much in not getting to a certain stage in the investigation when we're calling a commissioning manager. It identifies that you're not doing what they expected you to do. It's certainly a big safety net for investigators to have a terms of reference.
Yeah. We've got something from Danny Miller. Danny, do you want to ask yours?
Yeah, it was just going back to the point on harassment being related to a protected characteristic, but you said that there was 2 characteristics not included. I was just wondering what the rationale behind that was and why they're not included.
I couldn't tell you. I don't know. When I was looking at it, because I didn't know that until I was preparing these slides again. And I thought, oh, I thought everything was covered.
Yeah, it's not something I'd heard before. That was why I was asking.
Absolutely, me neither. And when I looked at the EHRC, which is a big long document, and it said something along the lines not covered, however, they are covered by discrimination. So I suppose if someone felt that they were being treated unfairly for those characteristics, it would go straight to discrimination rather than harassment. So I couldn't tell you without reading a lot more about it.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. I was hoping nobody would ask it. The other one I was going to say was that sometimes you have an investigation, someone says they're being harassed, and when you sit down and have that first conversation, it's the harass is just a turn of phrase to say I'm really unhappy. And we've had times where we have had to go back to the client and say, this was under your bullying and harassment policy, but it isn't covered by harassment because it's not a protected characteristic. So we're going to do the measures for bullying. So again, important that people do talk about being harassed a lot, don't they? So it's about being clear of what that person means. We've often had folks say, oh, no, I don't mean that. It's not because of gender or whatever. No, just they're not doing what I think is appropriate.
Does anybody want to share an experience, an anonymous experience of anything that they want to talk about and get Dorothy's take on? Just while we've got 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, a good friend of mine was the result of a really bad incident, but it happened 2 years ago, and it's still being investigated by an official body for the profession. And this is really having a really detrimental effect on her. And they kind of make appointments to do another interview, and then they cancel and all the rest of it. And I was just thinking, in your professional judgment, you know, I mean, obviously get an investigation done as quickly as possible. But when something's taking 2 years,
It's awful, isn't it?
well, it is. It's really causing a lot of distress for the individual. And I just wonder, you know,
I know. Yeah, and I mean, I'll talk now about when I was working in-house, and I'm thinking of the Health Professions Council. I don't know if that's similar to what you're thinking about. But we would do investigations, and let's imagine someone was, in fact, someone was given a final written warning, demoted from one role to a lesser role for a period of 6 months. And the investigation that the HPC were doing didn't start for months. And a year later, they come back to that individual who now was back onto his normal role, came back to that person and said, we're going to downgrade you for 6 months. And we're doing it, but he's already been downgraded for 6 months. No. So they had to downgrade for another 6 months. No. I mean, we know, you know, tribunals look really badly on workplace investigations that go on forever. Because you reach that stage, don't you, where it's just wholly inappropriate, particularly if somebody's suspended, for it to go on forever. But if you do have that statutory body, whatever it is, also running their investigation, there is a big dilemma there of how far the employment one goes, and do they wait for the other one? And if the statutory one has a significant impact on their future career, then it's really difficult. It's just not right. I know it's not right.
Okay, thank you.
Any others?
We thought we'd have loads of questions about this. Has this been helpful? Give us some feedback. Yep. I'm hoping that there's some wee nuggets in there, because there are some things that we might not have already known, which would be helpful.
Certainly been helpful. Yeah, excellent slides, covered so much. So thank you for your comments.
Good. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Some good comments. Thank you for that. Anything that Angela or any of the team want to finalise with before we go? We good?
I think we're good to go then. That was another good session. There was a lot there, but Joanna will put the links there, or if anybody needs anything, they just give us a call. We can talk through it.
Cool. Thank you very much, everybody. It's really